The script, when I read it, was always compelling story. The twists, the turns, the thriller element of it was always there. It certainly gave me a pit in my stomach. Maybe as a parent, just reading it, I had no idea where it was ending up, what was going on. I also was getting a sense of what was deeper in the DNA of the movie, the more contemplative side of it that made you think about issues of violence, of fear, of control, of, as I've later learned, the individual versus the institutional. There was so many themes, but actually it wasn't until Denis Villeneuve came on board that I said yes to it. I had been aware of the script for about a year, but I could see the movie going in a more generic thriller sort of version, and I could see the movie going down a track which was something that would make you think long after the credits roll. And as soon as I saw Incendie, which I presume many of you have seen, was nominated for an Oscar that Denis made, I literally was like that. And as soon as I met Denis, that was it for me. And I think Denis, I wish he was here to talk to you, because he, as he says, he loved many of the themes of the movie, but he's a lover of silence, and it's such a rare thing, particularly in a thriller, to actually have time to get into the characters, to the story, to the situation. I think that's why it resonates. And I always had a soft spot for that character as I read it, because I got a sense of a man who had worked really hard to be the best version of himself. Really hard. It's a day-to-day battle for him to protect his family, to actually be a good man. And to watch it unravel in 8 or 9 days is heartbreaking to me. I'm always sort of very much drawn to those kind of characters. I did a lot of research, as we all did, into all those aspects, into the sleep deprivation, which is one of the most fascinating. Turns out you should have 8 hours sleep, by the way, just so you know. And also into the real cases that are going on right now. We see them in the news, but to really watch the interviews and see them, to read what families have gone through in detail was harrowing, and that gave me a sense of the responsibility that we all had in making this film.
I remember when I had my son, I said, this is the worst day and the best day of my life. The best day because I will never love anyone as much as I love this kid. And the worst day because I'll never be able to protect him from all the lessons he has to learn. And everything that he needs to do. And you know, my heart goes out to those families who are experiencing right now what this movie is about. Because there are, and sometimes we forget that. We're doing a movie, it's our playground. We get into the characters, it's interesting, the psychology of them. As you said, there are 4 different parents, and we all deal with it in 4 different ways, right? So we have Hugh's character that is, you know, this is the moral right, this is what I'm doing. We have my character who falls to her knees in grief and cannot get up. We have Viola, who is so practical about it in a certain extent. And we have Terrence with this moral ambiguity. And when we ask people, how far would you go? Most people say, I would be a bit of both, all of those characters somehow. And I think Denis Villeneuve made a conscious decision to do that, to help all of us to think about who we are as human beings. And that's why I think this is very different than your traditional Hollywood thriller. It brings in those themes and makes us think about our own humanity.
I always found it fascinating as an idea that you would meet this guy who was written as, you know, the guy who was sort of straight-laced and ready to go and wanted to solve the case in this small town. But my question was, what if he was a question mark himself? And what if, and what was so fun about making the movie was that Denis Villeneuve and Roger Deakins were so fascinated with deflecting and doing the same thing in different ways. You know, you see the way something is framed by Roger Deakins, and, you know, I may be right in front of the clue, directly in front of it. The clue's in the center of the frame, and I'm staring at it while I'm talking to him on the phone, and yet somehow it doesn't really register, but it does unconsciously. And so to me, that's what I thought was intriguing about the part, was to take something that could be so kind of filled with cliches and put all these question marks that everybody would have to be watching while they were watching me try to figure out all the other question marks. So that was basically it. And I also like the idea of a detective. Anybody who's good as a detective has to be infatuated with the mind of the criminal, as well as empathize with what, you know, the families of this situation or anybody who's been involved in any kind of crime is going through. So I like the idea of somebody who had his own past and had to love that mind of the criminal. And I think that just led me into a dark, interesting world, but also a world to walk in. When I was dealing with them, I knew somewhere that I loved that mind that had done something so horrible, and that at the same time to walk into the mind of the criminal and to know how much I loved them and how much I wanted to find those girls.
I love the fact that the movie was more of an allegory and almost a litmus test, that I think when people come into this experience, I think that they probably pick and choose which character they would be if they were in that situation. And Keller absolutely is the last person we would think we would be, but I don't think we really know. With my character, I made a decided effort that I was not reacting to the fact that my child was dead, only missing, because I could not embrace the fact that she could be dead. And that's what kept me practical. I think that was more interesting to play than, oh my God, she's missing, so she's dead.
Denis reminded me that the character is not just connected to his daughter, but he has an intense love for the Dovers. He has an intense love of everyone around him. He loves music. So I looked at it from the state of a Buddhist approach towards being and that total interconnected nature. And so I thought, well, what if and he has such a visceral reaction to all of the lights when he's coming back, and it makes him sick. So I said, well, what if he has synesthesia, where one stimulation affects more than one sense? And so in giving him the sense of synesthesia, it gave him, this empathetic nature to where he, that moral quagmire of what do you do, versus the responsibility versus your nature. And at heart, our nature is to remain, or at least Franklin's nature was to remain as a jewel of creation, one of God's children, and maintain his hope. But it's hard to keep hope when everything around you tells you that there's no hope left. And you're just looking to be re-encouraged. A man told me once when I was on a plane, he said, you have to remember in every person that you meet, there's a little piece of God in them, and that's who you talk to. But you make sure that they see it in you first. So in trying to keep that little piece of God and continually see it in Keller, and to continually see it in my wife, to continually see it in myself, that is what was the nature of my process with the character.
I was offered the part before Denis was attached, with another director attached. It didn't really interest me. It seemed like some pretty dark water to swim in, and I do, as you all know, go fairly deeply into my characters, and that made me nervous. And then, as Hugh was saying, I too met Denis. This is a beautiful human being, a very, very special man. And his filmmaking that you have the pleasure of watching is a small portion of who this human being is. And with his decency, I felt I could take his hand and play this role in his film that somebody needed to play, or they couldn't make the movie.
I think most of the characters have this moral gray area that makes it really true, because it's tragedy and there's just no right answer in this circumstance, unfortunately. So that opens a lot of doors to just say, okay, why is this guy like he is? How did he end up like this? And you just really start to figure it out, more about what happens before the film. So in all those silent moments, you at least have a full human being thinking there. And
Talk about the makeup of the face. I mean, you were beat to a pulp.
No, that was real. That was Hugh Jackman.
We were
Being
deep
method.
in it, deep in it.
it's worth it once you see yourself, because it puts you somewhere, and it's worth it for the audience. But this is a very private character, and have people touching your face all day is actually really hard for me. Before doing a scene, you sort of want to go. The character's really far back into himself somewhere, and so to be constantly touched, I don't think he liked to be touched either. So that was actually challenging.
There's a scene where I'm showing you the pictures of the bloody children's clothes. And the scene was written as Keller throwing me up against the wall and strangling me and saying, "This is your fault, you did this," in a really violent way. And on the day of that scene, and by the way, we're shooting this actually very quickly. I mean, we had an ample amount of time in a way, mostly waiting for overcast weather. But
In Atlanta.
yeah.
In January.
Yeah. But we really didn't have a lot of time, particularly in certain spots. And in the police station, we didn't. And I remember Hugh coming up and saying, I just don't feel right about doing this. He's so physical with Paul's character, and he's going to be. I don't even think they had not even shot that stuff yet. But he said, I really think it's much more cutting if he just sat there and said to him, this is your fault. You know, you wasted time. And what ensued was Denis saying, I love that idea. And in my opinion, like some of the best acting I've ever witnessed in front of me, and some of the most vulnerable acting I've ever seen from an actor, and the stuff that he does in that scene. And I think what happens when you have a director who's able to sort of just steer the ship in the correct way, see that the moment exists and where it exists and how it really can be implemented.
Those
by
are
the story.
two examples of the ways in which the script was taken away because of the conversations. And there was another moment, I think Hugh will remember, that I couldn't get my mind around this ice bag over Holly's hand. And she's playing a trick with the thing. I couldn't, she hurt her hand. I wasn't really understanding it. And then when I did begin to understand it, I just felt it would never work. I felt it would never work because I'd spent so much brain time on it, you know, good old actor thinking. And Denis was also very deft at getting us where we needed to be when in fact there it was right on the page in front of us.
Only work with a director that's in love with you and that you're in love with, because that's the only way you'll trust him or her, or they will trust you.
Everyone should work with a director with a French accent, by the way. But
I'm surprised there weren't more boobs in the movie, to be honest.
Yeah. But I will say this, is that I know that acting is not rocket science, but it is an art form. And I think, you know, when you, just personally, you're going from job to job and job to job, you get on the set and you just want to hit the result. That's it. And somewhere along the line, you forget the process, the creative process, the getting there, the discovery, the leaving yourself alone, the thinking that you know exactly what it is, and then once you leave yourself alone, you're surprised and it takes you in another direction. But you trust the director enough to just fly with it. It's such a beautiful thing to remember what it is that we do, and for people to see the results of what we do, which is something I think that was quite spectacular. We'll see tomorrow when we look at the box office.